And good afternoon again. Thank you so much for joining us again. You know, I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to join us here in Washington, D.C., and for those folks that are joining us via live stream today from their own homes as well, thank you so much. Over the past few days, nearly 600 people have been here in Washington. They've come together to increase the awareness of ALS and to support our research for a cure. While we're still searching for a cure, though, many folks are interested in current therapies. What's available for me today? With that said, we have an expert ALS physician here to share with us current therapies and shed light on some of the myths and facts that might be associated with current therapies or treatment that is touted over the internet, through the newspapers, or other social media sites. Holding degrees in medicine, research, and science, Richard Bedlack leads the International ALS Untangled program. That program focuses on investigating alternative and off-label treatments for ALS. He's chairman of the North American ALS Research Group, associate professor of medicine at Duke University, director of the ALS Certified Center at Duke, chief neurologist of the Durham VA Medical Center, and he's received awards in teaching, in patient care, and in advocacy. During his spare time, he's published over 60 articles related to ALS, and he's edited several ALS textbooks. Originally from Connecticut, Dr. Bedlack lives in Durham, North Carolina with his wife Shelley, and I understand 2 very mischievous kittens. Join me in a warm welcome for Richard Bedlack.
Perfect. Thank you, Cynthia. I had hoped I could do a wardrobe change in between my first and second session. But unfortunately, Merritt's talk was too interesting. I didn't want to run upstairs and miss it, so you're stuck with this again. All right, so we're going to talk about myths and facts about ALS today, and I entitled this talk, Opening Up the X-Files of ALS. Hopefully I didn't date myself with that reference. Most of you will remember this TV show. It was my favorite of all time, The X-Files. It ran for about 10 years, and then it spawned 3 movies. The show was about a guy named Fox Mulder. When he was a young boy, he saw his sister get kidnapped. Her name was Samantha. And the way he remembered it, she was kidnapped by aliens. And he spent the rest of his life investigating reports of aliens and other similarly supernatural findings. And usually, he would find a rational explanation. So this was my Samantha. She was a 60-year-old university professor that I had to diagnose with ALS. It was a pretty straightforward diagnosis. At the time that I saw her, she was still pretty early in the course of her disease, with just a little slurred speech, a bit of arm and leg weakness, still able to take care of herself, still able to ambulate. She had no obvious cognitive or behavioral problems. I sat down and educated her about the disease and talked with her about stage-appropriate, evidence-based options, which included riluzole and multidisciplinary team care. And then I asked her if she wanted to be in one of the research studies that we had open. She opted for the first 2, but said she was going to pass on the research because she had decided to pursue something called the Deana Protocol. Now, for the purposes of today's lecture, I'm going to refer to things like the Deana Protocol as alternative and off-label therapies and abbreviate them AOTs. I'm going to define those as non-mainstream therapies that are advertised to slow, stop, or reverse ALS progression without good evidence. So the first time I had a patient say something like this to me, it's fair to say that my face looked a little bit like Fox Mulder's face the first time he came in contact with real live aliens. And as I was driving home that day, I remember thinking to myself, is this a common thing that patients with ALS do? Turns out it's very common. So whether we survey patients or we survey the doctors that take care of them, we find that more than half the patients out there with ALS will use at least one AOT over the course of their disease. Why? Well, the answer here is pretty obvious. ALS is a devastating, incurable, and fatal disease, and we still have few proven treatment options. The things that we do have, and even the things that we have in the pipeline right now, we're hoping might slightly slow progression. As in the slogan of this old X-Files poster, patients and families want to believe that there's something better out there. And when you ask them, why are you trying this, 10% say they think they're going to find a cure, 20% think they're going to find something that will make them better, 50% say they think they're going to find something that will slow down the progression of the disease. Other answers that we hear, well, my wife or my family want me to try this. That's called peer pressure. And then finally, my favorite one, Doc, I already have ALS. What worse could possibly happen to me? So onto that background comes the internet, which makes it easier than ever for people selling AOTs to come in contact with patients and families who want them. So if you did a Google search of ALS treatment in 2011, you would find 43 million hits. If you did it a year later, you would find 80 million hits. Now, not all of these things are AOTs, but many of them are. The other interesting thing about the internet is there are no internet police. There are no internet fact checkers. So people can pretty much say whatever they want about the thing that they're selling. And so here's an example of some commonly spoken claims on the internet. Let's see if this thing works as a pointer. Well, I guess it doesn't. But if you look over on the right-hand side of this slide, this is a website that advertises a product called MotoTab for guaranteed treatment of motor neuron disease. A patient sent me this one time, and I read it, and it said, the most relied upon and clinically proven natural treatment for motor neuron disease, and I blushed after I read that, because here I am thinking that I know a lot about ALS, and I had never heard of this. And then if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you see the MotoTab guarantee. This is completely guaranteed. You are at no risk for trying MotoTab. So, it's all funny, but what's the problem with this? Well, like the old X-Files slogan here, information that's available to patients and families who are trying to decide whether they want to pursue one of these AOTs is not good. It ranges from absent to highly flawed to completely inaccurate. Let's look at some examples. You might say, how could somebody make a claim and have absolutely no information to back it up? Well, here's how it works. So on the MotoTab website, they say, you may download a summary of our clinical study. Click here for details. And you click the link, and you get this. Clinical study soon to be posted here. Now, let's see when the website was actually created. Well, if we look at the bottom left-hand corner, it was actually created in 2003. So I'm not sure what study was completed in 2003 that's taken 10 years to post, but it must really be something. Now, these folks have an external link to another group that appears to be independent, which is called the Society for the Promotion of Alternative Health. And they have done a comparison of MotoTab to two other products that I had never heard of. One is called Neurotax, and the other one is called Ronatin. And the assays include traditionally proven, clinically tested, worldwide usage, and short-term focus, none of which are defined, nor is it clear why there's a difference between 2, 4, and 5 check marks. I'm not sure which one is supposed to be better. But somehow, although the products are exactly the same on all assays except for the fact that MotoTab is the only one clinically tested, MotoTab comes out second in the rankings. Very odd. So we'll get back to this later. Much more common than completely absent information is flawed information. And this can be very difficult to sort through unless you have a background in science and statistics. So this is a graph that comes off of a website for something called the X Cell Center. At one time, this was the most popular stem cell clinic in the world. Patients with ALS were flying to Germany to have the stem cell procedure that this clinic was doing. which is not uncommon, not very much different from some of the other things we heard about today. They were taking bone marrow-derived stem cells, isolating those cells, treating them in a proprietary way, and injecting them back into the spinal fluid. And on the website, they had this data. So here you see some sort of assay and something that happened to different groups of patients with ALS. And so there's about 53 patients here. And you can see that the majority of patients who had this procedure either did not change or got better after it was done. Well, that looks pretty amazing because that's not what usually happens to patients with ALS. And so the question is, what was this measurement? It's nowhere listed on the website, but if you get in contact with the people that run this, they will tell you. What they did is they called patients on the telephone after they got back from the center, and they asked them, are you worse, unchanged, better, or a lot better since you had our stem cells? And they actually made that call usually within a few weeks of when the patient got home. So what's the problem with that? The problem is that there's something called a placebo effect that we have to watch out for. That is the beneficial effect in a patient following a particular treatment that arises from the person's expectations rather than from the treatment itself. It's very well defined. It happens not only in ALS, but in just about every disease that we study. Now, there's some interesting things about the placebo effect. First of all, the more invasive a treatment is, the more likely it is to have a placebo effect. So here, you're getting a bone marrow biopsy and a spinal tap. Second, the more expensive and difficult to get a treatment is, the more likely there's going to be a placebo effect. Well, this was $25,000, and people had to fly all the way to Germany to get it. And third, the sooner after you do the intervention, the more likely to see a placebo effect. And so this was a perfect storm of all the things together that were most likely to produce a placebo effect. And so most likely what we're seeing here is nothing more than a placebo effect. And then there's the final category of misinformation that's out there, and that is information that is just completely inaccurate. So this is off of the website of what was, without a doubt, the most interesting of all the things that my group ALS Untangled ever reviewed. This was a person whose name was Dean Kraft, practiced out of New York City, and his intervention was called energy healing. He would put his hands on you, and something would come out of his hands that would make you better. And Mr. Kraft did not have any explanation for what it was, didn't know what it was. His website, it's still up, it's very, very interesting. There's a whole bunch of testimonials from different people about different things that they've seen Dean Kraft do over the past several decades. My favorite one was one that I opened up, and it said, "To whom it may concern, in 1978, I saw Dean Kraft move a pendulum that was under a glass jar using only his mind. Signed, John Smith." So maybe he did move it, but I mean, the thing is that it's very difficult to validate some of the claims that are made. So without a doubt, the most extraordinary part of this website was this case of a woman whose name was Nell DeBoos. And Dean Kraft mentions that this was a woman that had had multiple tests at America's top hospitals and was clearly diagnosed with ALS, and she'd progressed to the point where she was massively disabled, and then she started going to him, and she got completely better. And the last line, this was the first case on the medical books of Lou Gehrig's ever going into full remission. It was unequivocal proof that the laying on of hands can reverse terminal illnesses that have no hope, no cure, and no treatment. So I have to admit, when I first saw this case, I got the goosebumps. I said, holy cow, did I actually just stumble onto the cure for ALS? Am I going to be at the International Symposium talking about energy healing? And so the first thing I did is try to find Nell DeBoos, and I found her. Social networking is pretty amazing. She agreed to send us her medical records, and there's no question in my mind that she had ALS. She was diagnosed by one of America's top hospitals. She had all the right tests, all the right mimic tests. There's also no question in my mind that she progressed to the point where she was nearly completely paralyzed, and then she got better, completely better. So what happened? Well, turns out there is something out there called reversible ALS. There have been multiple cases of people that were diagnosed by the gold standard definition of ALS who progressed and then got better. I've seen one of these myself since we published our review on Dean Kraft. So it's possible that this woman just had one of these very rare cases of reversible ALS. Nonetheless, in my opinion, whenever we find a case like this, we should do our best to try to study whatever that person was doing, no matter how crazy it might sound. So I asked Dean Kraft if he would partner with me. I said, I'll find the money, I'll get the patients, I'll confirm the diagnosis, I'll follow all the outcome measures, I'll present the data to a scientific audience when it's over, no matter how it turns out. And I'll even pay you for your treatments. Do exactly the same thing that you did with her. We'll do it in 10 people. If you can replicate this even one more time, you're going to be pretty famous. And the response that I got back was just a single line. It said, to those who believe, no proof is necessary. And to those who don't, no proof is ever enough. So, unfortunately, we'll never be able to study that. So the other problem, besides the fact that the information is difficult to work with, is the fact that there are real harms that can come to people who pursue these AOTs. So even though the proponents of these things often say that they're perfectly safe, that's not true. First of all, we've documented financial harms. So there are things out there that cost people hundreds, thousands, or even hundreds of thousands of dollars a month to try. So when you ask the question, what worse can happen to me? I already have ALS. You could have ALS and be $100,000 in debt because you tried one of these. That's worse. There's psychological harms that can come to people who try these things. Folks will go to a mainstream clinic and they'll be told about the realities of ALS. Sometimes they'll come under the care of one of these folks who will tell them that that's not true, that their ALS can be cured. And then inevitably, 6 or 12 months later, when the money's gone and the person doesn't want to treat them anymore and the ALS is getting worse, you can imagine how devastating that is. There's real physical harms. So my group, ALS Untangled, we have found on some of the treatments that are advertised as perfectly safe, people who've developed infections, people who've developed blood clots, people who've developed myocardial infarctions, and people who have died. I would not say that that's perfectly safe when you see those kinds of things. Maybe the most dramatic of all the physical harms that I've seen came from a patient who pursued an AOT. Now, this person did not have ALS. This person had another neurodegenerative disease called ataxia telangiectasia. Unfortunately, also a disease where we don't know a lot about what causes it. It's unfortunately progressive and life-shortening. His parents found a stem cell clinic in Russia that advertised that they could cure this disease. $25,000. They took their child over there. They raised the money. They had the child injected with the stem cells. They came home, and a few months later, the child started having headaches. His doctor here in the United States did an MRI, and at the end of the arrow there, you see an abnormality. That is a brain tumor. That brain tumor was biopsied and found to be composed of someone else's cells. In other words, they spent $25,000 and were injected with tumor cells. That was a clinic that advertised their therapy as perfectly safe. And then finally, there's also scientific harms that can come to people who pursue these kinds of things. And we talked a little bit about that today, about the enrollment problem that we have. Many times, patients who pursue these kind of things do so in place of enrolling in a clinical trial. And as a result, the whole field is slowed in terms of getting the answers to those trials, and ultimately the cure for ALS is delayed. So what can we do about this? Well, I mentioned this morning when someone asked me a question that there are different models by which decisions get made in the doctor-patient relationship. There's actually 4 of them. The oldest model is called paternalism. So there, the doctor defines the patient's values and goals, as well as the action plan that the patient is going to carry out to reach those. The patient's job is just to do what the doctor says. So if I was going to approach Samantha with a paternalistic style of decision-making, I would say, you know, Samantha, that's a really bad idea. I don't want you to do that. I want you to come into a research study. That's the best thing. With the advent of the internet, there has come something on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, which is the fully autonomous model, where patients not only define their own values and goals, but also define what they're going to do to achieve those. So in a fully autonomous model, Samantha might come to me and say, Doc, this is what I'm going to do. And I would say, you've made up your mind, good luck. Then there are the in-between models. One of them is called consumerism, and the other one's called shared decision-making. So here there's some back and forth between the doctor and the patient. The patient's job is to set their own values and goals, and the doctor's job is to not only give the pros and cons as far as the science, that's consumerism, but also to give an opinion, that's shared decision-making. So there I might actually do some research on the Deana Protocol and say, here's what I know about it from a science perspective, and here's what I think about it in terms of my opinion. Each one of these models has its own strengths and weaknesses. Paternalism, well, physicians do have many years of specialized training and lots of experience with patients, and so they have the tools to critically evaluate treatments. Also, this model has been around for hundreds of years, so there must be something about it that some people like. The bad news about paternalism is that patients and physicians might not share the same values and goals. They also might not share the same concept of what's acceptable risk. Also, there's not just one kind of patient. Patients want their information delivered to them in different ways. So the literature defines 3 groups. One group is called active seekers. These are people who want a fire hose of information. The day you tell them that they have ALS, they want to know every possible thing that there is to know about ALS. More common are selective seekers. They want a trickle of information. They just want to know, what do I need to know about this right now to make the next few decisions that I have to make? But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. And then the toughest group are the information avoiders. Those are folks who don't want to even know that they have ALS, much less know any of the kinds of decisions that they have to make. They want things to be filtered through somebody else that they trust. The biggest problem with paternalism is that it can be abused, and it has been abused. We talked a little bit this morning about the Tuskegee experiments. That's an example of paternalism being abused in research, where researchers decided that we're going to deceive these farmers in Tuskegee, Alabama. We're going to put them through this trial because it's for their own good that we're trying to learn the answer to this. There have been abuses of paternalism at the bedside. In fact, that's where a lot of our current malpractice law came from. It came from many decades ago, surgeries being performed on people who said, no, I don't want that done. And it was done anyway because it was for their own good. Autonomy's got its strengths and weaknesses. Obviously, respect for patient-defined values and goals should be paramount. Also, this allows patients to proceed with information gathering at their own pace. The problem here is that the doctor is basically reduced to a vending machine. So all those years of school and all those years of experience are really not brought into the equation at all. Also, patients' values and goals may not be well defined, and they may change as time goes on. The biggest weakness of autonomy is what we talked about before, and that is that the information that the patient and family are using to make their decision may be flawed. And then finally, there's these in-between models which utilize the patients to define values and goals and the physician's talents. The problem with these models mainly is that they take more time. You can imagine that it would be much quicker and easier for me to just say to Samantha, no, we're going to do this instead, or okay, good luck. It takes a lot more time for me to actually go out and do all the research on this Deana Protocol and to come back with an opinion. And oftentimes it doesn't just end there. There's a lot of back and forth. Well, what about this angle or what about that angle? So there's a lot of back and forth here. Turns out that most patients and most doctors like shared decision-making better. And it also turns out that shared decision-making is associated with improved compliance. Not hard to believe that if a treatment decision is entered into after some discussion, both people believe in it more, and because of that better compliance, also better health outcomes. But what do we do about the fact that time in medicine is getting more and more scarce? Well, the answer to this came to me in 2007 when I was sitting at the International Symposium thinking about this, and I saw a guy from Europe, Dr. Leonard Vandenberg. He did something that, to my knowledge, was totally unprecedented. He had some patients ask him about a therapy that was really popular at that time. It was going on in Beijing. It involved fetal olfactory epithelial cells that were being injected into the front of patients' brains with ALS. And on the website for this clinic, it said this was safe and 50 to 70% of people were improving. So Vandenberg decided to go out and investigate this clinic and these claims the way a scientist would investigate any other hypothesis or claims. But beyond that, what he did is he decided to make his investigation public. In other words, he made his shared decision-making shared, so that the next time somebody asked about this exact same clinic in another ALS clinic somewhere else, we'd be able to point to what Vandenberg did. We wouldn't have to go back and do all that work again. So what he found was that he visited the clinic, he interviewed physicians, he followed 7 patients in his clinic that had this treatment. There was no objective benefit in anyone. And there were documented harms. One person got a blood clot. One person got pneumonia and died a few days after the stem cell therapy. And it cost $25,000. So it was neither safe nor effective and quite a bit more expensive than one might think. But shared decision-making is what I decided to try to do. So I created this program called ALS Untangled as a result of hearing Vandenberg. And I utilized the expertise in the National ALS Research Group, which is the ALS RG. So I want to make it clear that the goal of this program is to get the information out there to you. The goal of this program is not to keep you from doing something that you want to do. We just want to make sure that when you make a decision, you have all the information that we can possibly get you. There's 3 parts to this. We get inputs from patients and caregivers with ALS. We do the actual investigation or review, and then we get the findings of our review back out there to you. So how do we get the information? Well, we're trying to make it as easy as possible, right? So if you come to any of us in clinic and ask about it, I get emails from the person that you asked. So doctors email me about once a week telling me about something that a patient asked about. I've got my email address all over the internet, and we use something called Twitter. Most of you probably know what that is. But the nice thing about Twitter is that you don't actually need to remember anyone's name or email address. All you need to remember is the word ALS Untangled, which is one word. So you can send a short text message out into cyberspace from anywhere in the world that says, ALS Untangled, there's a guy here next to me in Russia who's claiming that chelation can cure ALS. What do you know about it? You don't even need to know me or my email address. I can reach out and find that tweet and put it on our list of things that we're going to review. We've now got a website that describes how to use this program, including how to use Twitter. So when you're on Twitter, you have followers, the number of people that follow your tweets or messages. The first year we had 130 people, and as you can see over on the left-hand corner, we've steadily grown. Last month we crossed a milestone, which is that we now have more than 1,000 people following our Twitter feed. I was pretty excited when I saw this until I realized that Lady Gaga has 33 million followers. You know, in fairness, she does have her own stylist. I put this together myself. So our tweets are starting to come in more frequently than I ever imagined they would. We typically get about a tweet a day now. And as a result of all these Twitter followers and all these tweets, the number of things that we've been asked about is growing. In fact, the list is now so long that the website won't even hold it. It's falling off the bottom of the website. We now have 64 different alternative and off-label therapies that we're trying to investigate. Luckily, our team is also growing. So originally we had 38 clinicians and scientists from across 4 countries. We now have 85 from across 10 countries. And we are now interacting mainly by emails. We've had more than 100 emails just in the past year about these things. We've got a very standardized approach. Make sure you understand that this is just not my opinion about these things. This is actually a sort of standardized scientific way of critiquing each of these alternative and off-label therapies. First, if it's a person that's running this thing, we make multiple attempts to contact them to get their side of the story. So we try by email. If that doesn't work, we try by phone. If that doesn't work, we try by snail mail. We try to get the materials from the clinic. We try to review the website and any handouts that they're giving to patients. We do a PubMed search. PubMed is a website that allows you to look at all the scientific articles that are published in scientific journals to see if there's anything that's actually out there that's been peer-reviewed in a scientific journal about this treatment. We also do a Google search, and that is to look for anything in the lay press or any blogs that might be out there describing this particular therapy and what happened. We poll our team of 85 clinicians and scientists to find out if any of us have patients that are trying this. And if so, we ask those patients if they would share their data to confirm that they have ALS, and also so we can see what's happening with their validated outcome measures. We look on a nice website called Patients Like Me, where patients with ALS can go, put down what they're taking, and also track some of their own outcome measures. So we get that data. And then finally, we try to visit the clinic, like Leonard Vandenberg did. We try to interview the people that are doing this. We try to interview the patients that are there, and we try to look through the charts of what the clinic considers to be its best successes. We've even got a form that we bring to the clinic that's got very specific information that we're trying to get out of each clinic. And we share this form. So there's other groups out there that are trying to do similar things to what we're trying to do. You might have heard of ALS Worldwide. They like to investigate stem cell clinics. We've shared this questionnaire with them so that they can use this too. And then finally, there's our outputs. So we wanted to make sure that our outputs were free and that they could be out there to the widest possible audience. So the ALS Journal has partnered with us, which is really nice. They publish our articles in their journal. They give us space in every issue. And it's the only thing in the journal that is free. So you don't ever have to pay for one of our articles. How do we do this? Well, we put together a draft. One of us puts together the draft, takes the lead. We submit it around to the 85 of us, and we all have at least 48 hours to comment on what the draft looks like. And then once we finally have everyone's comments and we agree on what the draft should look like, we have a statement with all of our 85 names that says this paper represents a consensus of those weighing in. The opinions expressed here are not necessarily shared by every one of these investigators. Why do we put that in there? It's impossible to get 85 clinicians and scientists to agree on everything that we say about every treatment. So we just want to make sure that you agree with the gist of what we said. The articles are usually short, about 1,000 words, and they follow a very standard format. What is the therapy? Where did this idea come from? What's the rationale? How would people with ALS get this? What data are out there in terms of effectiveness? What data are out there in terms of safety? How much does this cost? And at the end of the day, what do we think of it in terms of our recommendation? So we're now up to 19 of these published reviews. We've looked at Lyme disease. We've actually done that one twice. We've looked at IPLEX, the Hickey Wellness Center, a variety of different stem cell clinics, something called Marty Murray's method, goat serum, low-dose naltrexone, blue-green algae, Lutamax, Deancraft, bee venom, coconut oil, cannabis, Prevagen, and sodium chloride. All right. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you about some of these surprising lessons that I have learned over the past several years of leading this program. The first is about the people that are out there selling these AOTs. So I had this concept in my mind when I started this that all of them would be like the Wild West snake oil salesman in this picture. And what I've learned is it's rarely possible to know the motivation of the person that's selling something. Now, there are some exceptions. We have definitely found some snake oil salesmen. Probably the most notorious of all these is Larry Stowe, who's pictured here. He was selling something called the Stowe-Morales Protocol in Mexico. It was another variation on a stem cell protocol. We actually worked with 60 Minutes to investigate this guy, and they have investigative techniques that we cannot afford, including the ability to use hidden cameras. And so if you haven't seen the video of this 60 Minutes story, it's called 21st Century Snake Oil. It's on the 60 Minutes website still. But Larry Stowe was on there calling himself Dr. Stowe, talking about his protocol and the work he was doing with several American institutions whom he named, as well as the FDA, and talking about how the patients that he was treating were getting up out of their wheelchairs, and most of them were back to normal within a few months. He later denied all those claims. The tape was played back to him. He stuttered and stammered, and then a few days later he disappeared. He finally was caught by the FBI, and he's now arrested and waiting trial. It turns out that Larry Stowe is not a medical doctor. The degree that he showed was a forgery. He was not working with any of those American institutions, nor the FDA, and there was no data to support his claims that any patient had ever gotten better. His treatment was over $100,000 per cycle. What about our friends at Mototab? We had our suspicions about them. So Mototab is actually run by a company called Oslo Health Solutions, and we tried all of our different ways to communicate with Oslo Health Solutions, and we never got a response back with any of our questions answered. So we went through our protocol like we talked about, and one of the things we do is a Google search. So we did a Google search on Oslo Health Solutions, and we found that this company has dozens of identical websites that are exactly the same except for the beginning of the word of what they're selling. So Mototab is for guaranteed treatment of motor neuron disease. Osteotab is for guaranteed treatment of osteomyelitis. Amylotab for amyloidosis. Serotab for Searings. MDtab for muscular dystrophy. Everything on the websites are exactly the same, including the fact that the clinical study is soon to be posted here. So then we asked, well, they did have this other group that supposedly tested their Mototab. What do we know about them? Society for the Promotion of Alternative Health. They're in a completely different country. So we reached out to them and we got no reply. did a Google search on them, and we found that they also have dozens of virtually identical websites that compares a product that ends in tab to a product that ends in tin and a product that ends in tax. And the comparisons are always exactly the same. The tab product is always the only one that's clinically tested, and it always comes in second. So one of our patients actually told us about a function that anybody can use to find out who really owns a website. And so it's called a whois function. You can type it into any server like GoDaddy.com. It turns out that all these websites, whether they're said to be owned by the Society for the Promotion of Alternative Health or Oslo Health Solutions, they're actually all owned by the same two brothers that live in Pakistan. So this does appear to be a scam. But there are also another group of people that are out there selling these AOTs that I call true believers. So this is Joe Hickey. He runs a clinic on Hilton Head, South Carolina. Dr. Hickey believes that heavy metals cause many different diseases, including ALS. How do I know he's a true believer? Well, after spending several days with him and his wife, first I got a chance to look in both their mouths. They insisted that I look in both their mouths to show me that they had all their fillings removed. And I also watched them hook each other up to IVs when the clinic closed every night and suck the metals out of each other's bodies. So I can't fault his belief. Not only are there some true believers out there, but some of the folks that are selling these things actually do some things really well that my colleagues and I can learn from. So I got to watch Dr. Hickey for 3 days interact with his patients, and then I got a chance to talk to those patients separately. And one of the questions I asked those patients is, why are you here? What brought you here? And overwhelmingly, the answer was the same. They said, we started in a mainstream ALS clinic. The doctor would come in, he would be all gloom and doom, he wouldn't look us in the eye, he never gave us any hope. And when we would ask about something like Lyme disease or bee venom, they would just kind of laugh us off. And in fact, we couldn't even get a response sometime if we called or emailed about one of these questions. Dr. Hickey was optimistic, almost to a fault. You know, if he chelated somebody and they said that they might be doing a little bit better, I mean, oh my gosh, the cheering that would go on, it was incredible. If one of his patients would ask him about something else, he was fully supportive, again, almost to a fault. I remember a patient that said, you know, I'm not sure the chelation's helping, I want to keep doing it, but I also read about Lyme disease, and Dr. Hickey's response was, Lyme disease? I read the same thing. How about if I give you some antibiotics for a few months and we see what happens? I mean, ultimate respect, not even really sort of looking into the theory. And responsiveness. I mean, every night, no matter how many messages were there or what time we finished clinic, Dr. Hickey would stay and he would answer every single message that was left. And I think these are things that my colleagues and we can learn from. We can be better at this. So some other lessons. some other lessons are about the treatments themselves. I thought that these things would be about as bogus as this picture of Bigfoot when I started this. And certainly we have found some things that are bogus. If I had to tell you what the bogus things share in common, they are as follows. Anything that's advertised as dramatically effective or a cure-all for multiple diseases that have very different pathophysiologies, I would look at with suspicion. If someone really has cured all neurodegenerative diseases as well as all of the world's worst cancers, there would be no reason they would be in a small strip mall in India next to a Kentucky Fried Chicken. They would be the most famous and wealthy person in the history of the world, okay? Anything that is advertised as perfectly safe has to raise an eyebrow. I mean, vitamin pills can get stuck in your throat. Tylenol, if taken at too high of a dose, can cause liver failure. Nothing is perfectly safe. Whenever you have a non-MD that is making medical recommendations, that's a problem. Whenever you have a place that has no oversight or informed consent, that's a problem. Whenever you have a place that doesn't do things exactly the same way or even close to the same way in different patients, that's a problem. When there's a large out-of-pocket expense before the treatment is administered and they don't want to see you back to see what happened after the treatment's done, that's a problem. But you know, on the X-Files, every once in a while, Mulder and his team would come in contact with something that just defied explanation. My favorite was this guy here. His name was Squeeze. He was on the show 4 or 5 times over the 10 years. This guy could squeeze his body down into tiny spaces so they could never catch him. And they never did figure out what was going on with him. So just like on the show, we have found some AOTs that probably warrant further scientific study. Why? Well, they might have a plausible mechanism. There might be some positive animal studies or some positive human studies, or there might be multiple case reports or blogs that suggest similar types of improvement. But there's got to be at least some human data available on safety and cost for us to recommend further study. So let's talk about some of those. So one of them is this stem cell procedure that was being done at the Hospital San Jose del Tecnológico in Monterrey, Mexico. These are CD133 positive stem cells that are isolated from a patient's blood and then injected into the front parts of their brains. The rationale is to improve the function of upper motor neurons. Well, I mean, it's something that we don't usually go after trying to distinguish between whether we're improving the function of upper or lower motor neurons, but the idea that stem cells could help in some way with motor neuron disease is, of course, very reasonable. So they did a small human trial. This was not a randomized or blinded trial. They took the first 10 patients that came to their clinic, gave them the stem cell injections, and the next 13 that came, they were the controls. And the data that they have are in these two graphs. So first at the top, you see the survival curves. Notice that the folks who got transplanted are wildly different from the folks who didn't. They survive much longer. Then you've got what happened to the ALS functional rating scale. So the white bars are the controls. The ALS FRS score is dropping down over time. That's 1 year's worth of data. But the gray bars, the folks who got transplanted, they actually improved for a little bit, and then they kind of came back down to baseline. So over the course of a year, on average, there was really no change in the ALS FRS, which is extraordinary. So what's the problem here? Well, the problem is the reason why we do randomization and blinding is because we want to make sure that the groups are similar when we start a study. So looking at some of the baseline variables in these two groups, one really stands out. The folks who got the stem cells, they'd had their ALS for almost 3 years. The folks who didn't had their ALS for only about a year. So the longer you have ALS, by definition, the slower you are progressing. Someone that had ALS for 3 years and made it all the way down to Mexico to get stem cells was probably a really slow progressor to start with, as opposed to the average patient with ALS who was there about a year into their disease. So, I mean, I do think that this probably needs to be replicated because we do have this difference, but there's an alternate explanation. A couple of other problems: it's expensive, $18,000 per injection. And then there's also this claim in the paper that was published on this that said this was safe and well tolerated. Well, they didn't have any tables of adverse events, but they did say that 1 of the 10 people died in the first 7 days after the treatment. So a therapy that has a 10% death rate is probably not safe and well tolerated. Next, there's this one, Ames Pro, also known as hyperimmune goat serum. It sounds crazy, but actually, this goat serum has a lot of interesting effects that it can do on the immune system, and there is some evidence that the immune system is gone wacky in ALS. So what's the data that this might actually work? Well, it's a single case report that's published in the medical literature, and interestingly, this case report is written by the patient with ALS who's treating himself with the goat serum. And what this person is doing is measuring his pulmonary function test, and that's what you see in the graph there. So the first set of dots that has a very steep decline, that's before the goat serum. The next set, where he started on low-dose goat serum, looks a little flatter. Then he got on medium-dose goat serum, and it looks still flatter. Then he got on high-dose goat serum, and his pulmonary functions are starting to improve. So that's very unusual for ALS. There's some problems here, though. First of all, this person was using many different alternative and off-label therapies at the same time. Second, no one's ever checked to see if this guy can actually do his own pulmonary function measurements and if they come out the way they should come out. And third, he decided to do multiple pulmonary function measurements and combine them into one score. And no one's ever done that before. We don't really even know whether that's valid. He reported no side effects and a cost of 19,000 pounds per year, which is not cheap. Then there's this one, Lutamax. This is a combination of vitamins and flavonoids, which are antioxidants. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to consider. It looks like oxidative stress is overactive in patients with ALS. So the evidence here is twofold. First of all, there's a video on YouTube. It's a very striking video. It's too long to show here, but that's the link if you want to look at it. It's a patient whose ALS has affected their arms, and so it's a man who's on the video. He's asked to lift up his arms, and his arms don't move. Someone puts a Ludamax tablet in his mouth, and then 30 minutes later, he does this. It's pretty extraordinary. We weren't able to find that person to validate that they had ALS or what their strength really was like. There was a small pilot trial that was published at a poster at a meeting, and so this is 25 patients, and they received the Ludamax at 800 milligrams a day, and the comparison group here was actually a placebo group from a previously published trial. And so the measurement is the ALS Functional Rating Scale, and you can see that the folks on Ludamax were progressing much slower than the folks who were in the placebo group of the topiramate trial. So there's a couple problems with this data. First of all, it's not randomized, it's not blinded. There's not a concurrent control group. Why is that important? The natural history of ALS is changing. People are doing better now with ALS than they've ever done before. They're surviving longer and probably progressing more slowly than they've ever done before because of all the little things that are done in multidisciplinary clinics. So when we do historical controls, we have to be careful to use a control group from around the same time period as our study. The other thing is that when we do a study, we do something called intention to treat. What that means is that if you start in one arm of the study, so if you start on the Ludamax, your data is going to continue to be counted whether you drop out of the study or not. Now, how do we count data if somebody's not coming to the study anymore? Well, basically you have to use some sort of method that you pre-specify. And the options are that you can use the last observation that the patient had and assume they don't change anymore from there. That's not usually done. You can use the first observation and assume that that's what they had throughout the rest of the study. That's not usually done either. Most commonly, we model the person's slope of decline, and we assume that that continues the same way after they're out of the study. But it's not fair to just assume, just take the data from people who were able to stay on the Ludamax, because that's the best possible scenario you can get. You can never replicate that. I mean, imagine if out of the 25 patients, only one person stayed on, the one person who thought they were doing really well. This would look fantastic. But there would be a 99% dropout rate that wasn't showing up in the data. So that's not really fair statistically. Some other problems here, why were the dropouts? Well, weight loss. There were a large number of people with weight loss. And then the cost of this is not that bad, $25 to $199 a month. So if I had to pick one thing, of all the things ALS Untangled has looked at that I would like to see us study again, it would be this one, coconut oil. So where did the idea for coconut oil come from? Well, a patient came into clinic one day and showed me this video that they saw on the Christian Broadcasting Network. And it was the video of a doctor, I think she was an obstetrician, whose husband had Alzheimer's disease. And she herself had this theory about coconut oil. And so she decided to treat her husband with this. And over the course of the video, there were several things that looked incredible as far as improvement. Maybe the most amazing of all was this. We do this test in people with dementia, which is called a draw a clock test. We ask them to just draw a clock, and we ask them to go ahead and make it show 6 o'clock. So you can see that one day before coconut oil, I mean, that looks nothing like a clock. 2 weeks into coconut oil, it's starting to look a little bit like a clock. And 37 days into it, it actually looks pretty good. So why might this work for neurodegenerative disease like ALS? Well, coconut oil is mostly medium-chain triglycerides. And when those are ingested, they're converted by the body into something called ketone bodies. Ketone bodies can act as a source of energy for cells that are under stress, for cells that can't produce their own energy. There is clearly an energy production problem in ALS, most likely because the mitochondria, which are the power plants in our cells, are not working properly. So this could be an alternate source of energy for cells that are having problems with their mitochondria. The other thing that coconut oil does is it raises your cholesterol. Now, why would that matter? Well, it turns out that several studies have shown that people with the worst cholesterol levels progress the slowest with ALS. So even without really understanding that, maybe by just raising people's cholesterol, we could slow down ALS. So there's no animal data on coconut oil, but there are data on other ways to increase ketone bodies. So there's data on a ketogenic diet, and animals who are on this diet progress more slowly and do better in terms of motor function than animals who are on a regular diet. And there's animal data on a high-fat diet. So animals on a high-fat diet also progress more slowly and live longer. There's no human trials of coconut oil. There's no validated case reports from any of our clinics. But there are some reports out there on the web, 5 of them from patients like me. One of the issues is that people are using all different formulations and dosages, and we really don't know what the right or best dose is. But 2 out of the 6 people that we found on the internet are actually reporting similar things that are believable. Like, for example, before I started coconut oil, my hands were so weak that I could not button my own shirts. And now a few months after I started coconut oil, I can button my own shirts again. That's believable. It doesn't seem to be many side effects to this. The most common one is loose stools. And in my experience, many patients with ALS have constipation anyways. So that might not be an unwanted side effect. And this is by far the cheapest thing that we've ever studied, $25 to $50 a month. We've had some challenges. We've got a widening gap between the things that we have reviewed and the things that we're trying to review. And the reason there is because we've had such a rapid increase in the number of Twitter followers, because some of the topics that we have were just blocked. We can't find any information about them, because it's difficult to find people who want to spend the time to take the lead writing one of these articles. It does take time. And also because there's a hard limit on the number of times that the ALS Journal comes out each year. It comes out 4 or 5 times a year. We've also been challenged by critique from some of the people we've reviewed who've claimed that they don't have a fair opportunity to rebut some of the things that we said. Now, in reality, there is an opportunity. They can write a letter to the ALS Journal, which will get published, but sometimes people are intimidated about writing to medical journals. Another challenge is it's difficult to measure the usefulness of a program like this. I've gotten some good feedback from people at this meeting and other meetings saying that they like it, but I'd like to have a good hard measure of usefulness. And then finally, we really don't have any resources for studying some of these interesting things that we've stumbled upon in our reviews. So how are we dealing with these? Well, we do have a small amount of grant money coming in right now, and we're using that to try to incentivize new authors. So basically, if there's a young scientist out there or a physician that is trying to figure out how they're going to get to the next international symposium, if they write an ALS Untangled piece and they can present it there as a poster, it's good enough to publish, we can pay for their meeting expenses. And this has actually gotten us 3 new lead authors in the past month. The ALS Journal has developed a place for us to publish our articles online before they come out in print, so that's not a limiting factor anymore. And also, we've expanded our own website to post a live Twitter feed. So, for example, if someone goes on their smartphone right here, right now, and says, "I think ALS Untangled is stupid and Bedlack's hair is ridiculous," it's going to pop up on my page in 5 minutes. There's nothing I can do about it. We've also had an idea that was suggested by a patient for how to prioritize this growing list. And that is, we've created a way for you to just go on there without registering or anything and vote for the reviews that you most want to see us do. So you can see here, this came up about 2 months ago, and you can see in the past 2 months there have been a lot of votes. And by far the top 2 things are the Deana Protocol and Dr. Jason Williams' precision stem cells. Usefulness. The only way I can come up with to measure usefulness is to look at whether people are actually downloading our articles. So every year, the ALS Journal, at the end of the year, publishes a list of the top 50 most downloaded articles. So I cut the list off and just showed you the top 12 most downloaded articles for 2012. 11 out of 12 are ALS Untangled articles. Now remember, our articles are free, so that probably helps. So to conclude, investigation of alternative and off-label therapies is timely and important. Like they used to say in the X-Files, the truth is out there, but it's not always easy for any of us to find. ALS Untangled tries to use social networking to bring patients, clinicians, and scientists together to systematically review and report on these AOTs. We've learned some interesting lessons. We've got some challenges. We're trying to deal with those. But for now, at least, it looks like people are reading our reviews. So back to Samantha. If we want to use a shared decision-making model to work with her, what we would do is we would show her a copy of ALS Untangled 20, which was just uploaded a couple days ago on the Deana Protocol. And so what it says is that Dr. Vincent Tadone, a retired orthopedic surgeon, put together this cocktail of supplements for his own daughter who was affected by ALS. And he himself observed that her disease seemed to slow down on this cocktail. There's another Christian Broadcasting Network video that's out there that shows not only this, but also an even more impressive patient whose initials are AT, who didn't just slow down. He actually says on the video that his ALS is much better since he started the Deana Protocol. This is what the Deana Protocol looks like. I apologize for the small print, but there are 25 different supplements on this protocol. And some of these supplements, things continue to sort of evolve and change. So for example, the last time I saw communication from Dr. Tadone, there were 5 of these things that were starred. That was his opinion. Those were the 5 most important things. Some of these things on here are rather vague in terms of how you're supposed to take them. Like if you look at coenzyme Q10, it says standard dosage from the bottle. I mean, there's a lot of different forms of coenzyme Q10 out there with a lot of different dosages. So the things that are in this cocktail are actually plausible in terms of how they might affect ALS. There's things on there to try to combat neuroinflammation, to try to combat free radicals and oxidative stress, to try to combat the excessive amounts of glutamate that we know are there. Some of the things in this cocktail, like creatine and coenzyme Q10, have been given to animal models of ALS, and they do seem to slow progression. There have been several anecdotal reports out there of patients emailing Dr. Tadone and also me, suggesting that they are improving. And we've got some patients like me who are using it, 14 of them on there. One person saying it's made them a lot better, 1 moderately better, and 2 slightly better. That's the good news. The bad news is that not everything that works in animals works in people. Unfortunately, most of the things that we have found that work in animals don't work in people. For example, creatine and coenzyme Q10 have already been studied in people many times, and they don't seem to do anything. The dosing in this protocol is odd. First of all, things like creatine and coenzyme Q10 are being given in recommended dosages that are much lower than the dosages that we have previously studied in people, which didn't work. So it's hard to understand why a lower dosage would work better than what we already tried. Other things like vitamin D are being given at dosages that are way in excess of the US RDA without any clear explanation as to why. This is referred to as a protocol, but it's really not a protocol because it's not reproducible. A protocol is an exact method that you can reproduce. If this thing is going to be seriously studied, then we can't have some patients taking 5 things, some patients taking 25, some patients taking coenzyme Q10 at 1 dose and some at another, right? Everybody's got to be doing the same thing. The reports that we're getting from patients are not uniform like they were with coconut oil, where we can see some very specific things that patients are saying that overlap. They're kind of all over the place in terms of what patients are experiencing. In terms of objective data, we tried to get medical records on Deana, right? So unfortunately, there are no medical records. She has not been back to a doctor since she started the Deana Protocol, so we don't have any way to validate either her diagnosis or the fact that she's slowed down. We do have records on AT, and there have been some slight improvements in his breathing function since he started the protocol. It's important to remember that breathing function can bounce around a little bit, but every other measurement that's being made by his ALS clinic is getting worse. So the claims that everything is getting better, we can't validate those. In my clinic, we've got 5 patients on it. All are progressing. It's not clear that the progression has been altered in any way in any of them. So we have not been able to objectively validate the claims that this is making people better. The good news is side effects seem to be rare. The bad news is it's reasonably expensive. If you want to use all 25 of these supplements, we've heard estimates in the $400 to $500 a month range. So based upon what we have found right now, this is our sort of conclusion. We don't recommend the Deana Protocol to patients. Before it can be recommended, a reproducible version of it needs to be shown to influence plausible mechanisms and meaningful objective outcome measures in patients with ALS. We'd be happy to go back and write another article about this a year from now. Hopefully there'll be better objective data about it. But in the meantime, Samantha is appreciative of the fact that we did all this research. She reads it, decides she's not going to do that. Maybe she decides she's going to come into a research study. In fact, she likes her experience so much that she winds up becoming one of our research ambassadors by attending our Clinical Research Learning Institute. So this has been quite an endeavor, quite a wild ride. I couldn't have done it with a lot of help. Just like the X-Files was great because there were so many characters, not just Fox Mulder. We've got a lot of characters that make this program great. Most important are you, patients and caregivers, because really this program's all about you. You give us the ideas, you give us feedback on how we can do it better. We've had funding in the past from the Packard Center, Motor Neuron Disease Association. The people who actually do the reviews are folks from the ALSRG, the ALS Association, the Muscular Dystrophy Association, the World Federation of Neurology. We've learned some things about how to investigate from 60 Minutes and from a guy who runs a website called Quackwatch. And we've got some nice sources of information from patients like me. They've been very open to collaboration. And also we've had a nice collaboration from the ALS Journal. So thanks for your time today, and I'll be happy to take questions.
I understand we do have some roving microphones in the audience, and since this is being live streamed, if you would just raise your hand with questions. Once you're acknowledged, please do wait for the microphone. Thank you.
Okay.
A question here?
Yeah.
Leanne Kozak, Greater Sacramento. A comment and a question. I am a visitor to your Untangled website, and I'm one of those that wants a bushel basket full of information. So I'd be really interested in being able to read your reviewers' reviews. It's kind of how I shop on Amazon. I mean, some of the negative comments have nothing to do with my interest in a product, and so I go ahead and get it anyway because it does what I want it to do. So might that be a possibility?
You know, I'd have to reach out to my team and find out how they would feel about that. I think that one of the reasons why we've had such a huge participation is that folks don't feel like they're going to have any repercussions. You know, if you're the figurehead for something like this, there are some negative things that come your way. I could tell you that I've had some threats, legal actions against me, death threats against me. Yeah, for real.
Yeah, and I get that. So that's a
So we have to be a little bit careful. I don't want to scare somebody away by saying that we're going to make everyone's comment public. And I also think that might make people a little bit more reserved in terms of what they say. I really want people's true opinions on this, and I don't mind sort of being the figurehead of all this and taking the brunt of it, whatever it is. So
yeah, that's a fair answer. And quick question about the cholesterol. Was there any difference with the good and the bad cholesterol, or was it just the gross count?
Yeah. So it actually turns out that the ratio is actually even more predictive of progression. The worse your cholesterol ratio, the better you do in terms of progression. Yeah. And we still don't understand it. And there's questions about cholesterol lowering agents and should people stay on those if they have ALS. So there have been some studies on that, and so far no one's been able to show that folks on cholesterol lowering agents are progressing faster than folks who are not. So the important thing to realize is it might not even be that ratio. It might be some other metabolic thing that's tied to that ratio that's accounting for why people progress differently. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I'm Deborah Wiseman from Tennessee. I was diagnosed in November of 2012, and it seems to be progressing fairly quickly, I'm afraid. But I can't wait to get home now and look up ALS Untangled and read what you've talked about here today. I thank you for doing that because it's a confusing world out there on the web.
Yep.
And I've tried to stay away from most of it. I'm kind of a trickler myself. Mm-hmm. My children have gotten on there and they send me stuff that looks promising. But one thing I wanted to ask you about was you said you had actually seen a person that you called reversible ALS.
Yeah. Was
there a follow-up study done on that person and on the others that you've heard about?
Yes. So all those people that are published and my patient, I've had follow-up exams as well as EMGs, and everything's better. And,
wow, I want to be one of those people that you talk about the next time you come.
Remember, me too. I want you to be that person too. Yeah, but I've had 1,600 patients worth of experience, and that's one. So I think that this is pretty rare. But I do think, that this should be part of our discussion with patients the first time we sit down with them, is to make sure that we sort of educate people about what this is and what we think is most likely going to happen, but also leave room for the fact that we don't know for sure what's going to happen. I have definitely seen people whose progression dramatically slowed down. I remember a patient that had a forced vital capacity of 30% predicted and had decided they didn't really want to do anything else aggressive. We went into hospice thinking we were in the last few months of her illness. That was 4 years ago, and she has not changed a bit since that day. I didn't do anything special to her. I mean, I'm thrilled that that happened, but it's a disease that is somewhat unpredictable, and I think that, well, we want to make plans for what's most likely going to happen. We need to have a serious discussion about options that we might have to consider and know sort of what you want. We also have to leave room for hope and optimism and realize that no one knows for sure what tomorrow brings. Yep.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, so my name is Debbie Schlossberg. I'm the Patient Services Coordinator for Northern New Jersey
Okay.
with the Greater New York chapter. So first of all, thank you for everything that you do for our patients. Sure. New Jersey is now one of 18 states where medical marijuana is legal. It's relatively new, and it's highly regulated. You can only get it for a very narrow number of conditions, and of course ALS is one of them. Not surprisingly, our patients are asking for it, but we don't yet have our arms around it. So I'd like to know what ALS Untangled found out about cannabis.
Yeah, so actually that's one of the things that we think is promising. We do think that cannabis is promising. The thing is, it's going to be difficult to study. And we've learned that from people who've tried to study cannabis for other disorders. I mean, it's very tightly regulated, and the cannabis that you can get your hands on for studies is very low potency. And so it seems like that's probably not the ideal stuff to work with in a study. But there are a lot of reasons why cannabis might be useful. So there are cannabinoid receptors on immune system cells, which may downregulate some of the neuroinflammation that goes on. And also there's a lot of anecdotal evidence online that overlaps with each other of patients suggesting that they're more relaxed, their secretions are better, their cramps and spasms are better, their twitching is better. So, I mean, but, it overlaps. So I think that those things are believable. So if you were to do a trial, you might look not only at the effect of cannabis on disease progression, but also the effect on some of these troublesome symptoms that we struggle to control in people that affect their quality of life. I would love to see a study on that. Yeah.
Hi. First, I just want to thank you for such an incredibly entertaining as well as thought-provoking session. It was inspiring, I think, for all of us.
Well, thanks.
I have a question. I was diagnosed a little over a year ago, and I don't hear much about, and I was encouraged to see your comments about taking a note from the optimistic guy at Hilton Head. Is there anything or much being talked about in terms of the impact of stress or the flip side of that, optimism and attitude and meditation? How's that? I don't hear that discussed much in this area, and I'm just curious about your thoughts about that.
Yeah, it's not something that we've reviewed. I mean, I personally think it makes a difference, but it would be a difficult thing to study. I mean, there may be a literature on that. I'd have to take a look, but I'm not exactly sure right now off the top of my head how to study that in patients. Yeah, but it's a great question.
Hi, I have a question for you around citizen science and the ability of all the people in this room to actually participate in self-designed studies with some guidance from the medical community to actually, do more systematic testing of some of these things that don't require federally controlled substances. Mm-hmm. And be able to put together the kind of evidence that could inform, some of this work, and what your thoughts are in that regard.
I think it's a great idea. I love it. I mean, I've become a big fan of the website Patients Like Me. I really have. I think that the ability for you to go on there and track, the things, the demographics of your disease, the things that you're trying, and some of your outcome measures, I think it's a great place to go for hypothesis generation. And I think that doing those things with a little bit more guidance, a little bit more reproducibility so that we know what dosages people are taking, and we try to limit the number of things people are taking, because that's one of the things that's confusing when you go on there and you pull up, 6 patient-like-me reports about coconut oil. Well, I mean, 5 of the people are doing 10 or 12 other things. So it's like I'm not exactly sure that the coconut oil is the reason or the combination of things. So, yeah, I'd love to see more back and forth for people who've decided to go that way, to get more involved in their own health care and want to do their own sort of self-experimentation. I'd love to see more back and forth with some guidance on how to do that in the best possible way. But remember what I said earlier today. I think that all that stuff would be great from a hypothesis-generating standpoint, but we've definitely learned in recent years in ALS that we can be fooled by preliminary data. And I think the only way we'll know for sure whether something works is to go all the way through the phase 3 randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial. But that doesn't mean that we can't get some hypotheses from patients with the disease.
Even if the people self-determine, a protocol, if there's a group of people that agrees to follow the same protocol, that's one way to create that.
I think it's a good first step. Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated thing because there have been attempts like this. There was an attempt by a nice man named Eric Valor to get people to use the same regimen of oral sodium chloride. And unfortunately, what wound up happening was there was a lot of variability in that, and it's very difficult to understand what that data means now. It's when you're in a clinical trial, you have a lot of supervision and support to make sure that you're really following the protocol and that things are carefully monitored. And when you're not, there's a lot more opportunity to skip a day or to add something else. It's going to be tough to keep people on a regimen that's consistent across all patients, but at least it's a start. I like the idea a lot. Yeah.
Reversible ALS is from God. Praise Jesus.
You might be right.
When I was first diagnosed, the same month I went to my first multidisciplinary ALS clinic. I saw the nutritionist and I was put on a high-fat diet. She became my favorite person at the clinic and demanded I eat ice cream. So I actually was happy. The 30 pounds that I put on in 3.5 years does not make me happy. But I know about the cholesterol, and you had mentioned at the Carrie B. Stools conference that BMI seems to also, a higher BMI also seems to be a common sort of thing, although you said you couldn't explain it.
It's true.
But when I ask and talk about losing weight, they look at me snake-eyed, like, what are you, nuts? But although my heart and everything is good, I can't imagine carrying this extra weight is good unless you tell me that it is. So what do you have to say about BMI?
Yeah.
Is that showing up more?
So the problem is that these are association studies, right? So there's association studies with total cholesterol and progression. There's association studies with LDL to HDL ratio and progression. There's association studies with BMI and progression. But an association is not necessarily causal. So we don't know if we take somebody who comes into our clinic with good cholesterol levels and a good ratio and they're lean, and we blow all that up with a high-fat diet, we don't know whether we're slowing down their progression. I mean, we're doing that because of the association studies, but there are trials that are underway. There's a high-fat diet trial underway, and hopefully we'll have an answer as to whether that intervention slows progression. I mean, with an association, it's possible there's something else that's really the reason why those folks are progressing more slowly. And the cholesterol and the weight may just be surrogates that might not actually be the reason why they're progressing more slowly. So it's just one of those things where we're not very smart about it. We know a little bit. We try to use the little bit that we have to help you, but we need better information.
On your website, could you separate out the different companies that, even though you may say they're not quite legit, but in their mind, they're trying to do everything that they can to help, cure the disease. That's the Deana Protocol. They're not doing anything that would do something to harm, as you showed some of the others. Could you separate these things out, on your website?
Well, remember what I said before. It's very difficult to know the motivation of a person who's out there, proposing a new treatment for ALS. I don't know Dr. Tadone. I'm assuming that his motivation is that his daughter was sick and he did his best for her, and then he was impressed by what happened. So I'll assume that that's right. But for me to go on there and put a statement next to each thing that says this person's motivation is good, this person's motivation is bad, I don't know. I mean, I'd be a much better poker player if I could read people like that. Yeah. So it's most of the people that I've come across, I think, are good people and are really trying to help folks. The snake oil salesmen are few and far between. They are out there. But just because someone's motivation is good does not mean that what they're doing works. There's a lot of good people out there that don't have a very good understanding of science and are making claims that are not evidence-based. So that's all we're trying to do with ALS Untangled is make sure that people have a critique of the evidence and a recommendation from a group of clinicians and scientists about what to do. And at the end of the day, if you read that and you still want to do it anyway, that's your prerogative.
Yeah. Well, most of our doctors that we see and haven't, did a whole lot either. So, maybe they have good intentions, but we've seen many trials that failed, same way as anybody else. So.
You're right. I mean, we haven't had much better luck than the people who are proposing the AOTs, but we're trying to go about the things we do in a scientific way, so that the answer we get is an answer that we can believe in, that we know is the right answer, and that's not the way a lot of these other folks do things. Just putting up a list of 25 things and saying take any combination of these things and email me if you're doing better. I mean, that's not very scientific. So if we can actually help Dr. Tadone by critiquing what he's doing and get him to do things in a more scientific way, and then that actually works, that's a great partnership. So maybe that's what will come out of this.
Yes. I've been on the Deana Protocol since October, and I've been to Jamaica twice and did stem cells. And I would say my progression has definitely slowed down from
Good.
I was diagnosed back in October, but November and December I really other than a wheelchair I couldn't get around. I do walk now a lot more than what I did back then. So
I mean, that's great. And the thing is, I'm willing to hear from any of you about what's going on. But I would love it if when you email me and tell me that you're doing better, you would also give me the number for your doctor and give me permission to actually get your medical records so that we can confirm that this is ALS and also that there's actually measurements that support the way you're feeling. I mean, that's what I think most of our readers want, is they want that objective scientific backup.
Well, the neurologists that I do see tell me I'm crazy for taking it, so they say you do what you need to do, but we're not going to say either way. So, I mean, I can send you the stuff that.
Yeah. It's not about what they say for me. It's about the measurements themselves. So we can look at the measurements. Hopefully, they're measuring things like, forced vital capacity, ALS functional rating scale. Those are easy things that almost all of us in ALS clinics measure every time you come in. And we'll be able to look at those and say, there actually is a flattening out of the slope here. That'd be great. I mean, we are not afraid to go back and write another article that says, hey, we've got more data and this looks different. We did that with Lyme disease. People criticized our first Lyme disease article. They said that, you didn't look at everything. Here's a whole bunch of other things we want you to look at. So we went back and did a whole nother review on that. And we still didn't find any connection. But we're happy to re-review things. We don't mind doing that. So this is what we know about the Deana Protocol today. A year from now, we may feel totally different about it when we have more information.
Yeah. Well, I don't want you to think I'm against you. I appreciate what you are doing, but the same thing you do, we, as someone with ALS, we have our skeptical things that we think about from, within the United States also, that that we feel that FDA, holds things back that we would like to try, but we don't get a chance to.
Well, just remember from the lecture earlier today about what the FDA does and doesn't control. There's a lot of things that they don't have any control over that I think they get blamed for. But I want to hear from you. I really do. And I don't want the things that you're doing to just be lost. I mean, if you're going to go ahead and do all those things to yourself, take on that expense and risk, we might as well let everybody else know what's really happening with you. So let's get it out there. Let's get it into the next Deana Protocol review.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My name's Patty Stanko with the ALS Florida chapter. I'm a care coordinator, and I refer a lot of patients to ALS Untangled. My question is, a lot of the ALS Untangled reviews conclude, in the conclusion is, this may have some promise, but we need more studies. Mm-hmm. How do we get those studies funded? Because pharma's not going to do them. There's no patent incentive. And these placebo-controlled double-blind clinical trials are very expensive.
Yeah,
what can we as advocates do?
Yep. So, I mean, there are a number of different places that people could go to try to get grant funding for those things. Like you heard Dr. Chkovich say that the Northeast ALS Consortium is funding pilot project proposals for people that have something that they want to study that's got a good rationale and they want to do a phase 2 trial that's got some markers. So, I mean, it would be reasonable for a young investigator to put together a proposal on coconut oil, put together the hypothesis that we talked about, put together the anecdotal data that we showed, and there's even a biomarker. You can measure ketone bodies. So you can pick some different doses and say, hey, we raised ketone bodies through the roof, and it either did or didn't seem to slow progression. To me, it's a great study. It seems to be safe. It's not very expensive. It seems to be a great thing to study. Someone asked me at lunch today, well, why don't you do it? And the thing is, I think my wife's about this close to divorcing me as it is, so I better not take that on.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Actually, I wanted to ask you, they're doing mice trials right now in Florida on the coconut oil, aren't they?
There's a I don't know about coconut, but I have seen Dr. I think it's D'Agostino, you pronounce his name, and he just had a YouTube video with some mouse data. Now the thing is, of course, YouTube, there's no peer review, so we don't exactly know like how many animals or what exactly what kind of measurements were made. But they studied, I think it was 4 or 5 of the things in the Deana Protocol and suggested that the mice were living longer. And that's great. I mean, I hope that really was a well-designed study, and I think that's a good first step, as long as the study's well-designed. But remember, even if everyone agrees, yeah, that really did slow down ALS in the animals, most of the things that we have found that slow down ALS in the animals do not work in people. So that's really important to remember.
Coconut oil reduces your triglycerides.
I don't know about triglycerides. I'd have to look at that.
No, it did on me.
Huh, interesting.
Mine went very high, and I get blood tests every 6 months.
Okay.
So they dropped way down, and I talked to Dr. Trainer on it. He said it's 60. I finished the statement. It's 60% saturated fat, but it's all natural.
Interesting. Okay.
So I don't know if that's a click with it or not. Didn't lower my cholesterol.
Yeah.
But I don't care about that. At this point, the reason people try things is there isn't anything else.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
And when you say clinical trials, some people only live 10 months.
yeah.
And we don't have time to wait.
Yeah. Believe me, I hope I didn't give the impression that I was looking down on folks who try things. I mean,
No, I know.
I just want to make sure that you have the information that you need to make good decisions, because in my opinion, the information that you have right now on the internet is not very good. It would be very difficult for anyone to look at that information and make a decision. So I'm trying to give you better information, that's all.
Well, the Deana Protocol is amino acids, right?
That's in there.
And muscle building stuff. I
Yep.
mean, isn't that what we want? Muscle building?
Yeah, and again, we do in every review, we critique the rationale. And yes, there is some rationale by which the Deana Protocol could work. All the things that are in there have a rationale that makes sense. And the idea of using them as a cocktail makes sense. But we have 100 years of research where the ideas looked really good on paper, and then unfortunately 99.99% of them didn't work. Right. So again, just because something is a good idea and it might work in animals, unfortunately, we've learned does not mean it's going to work in people.
And if you're doing coconut oil, people, take it with food.
We have time for 2 more questions, and could you put your ALS Untangled website up on the screen?
Sure.
Or your email address?
Let's see here.
So if you don't have your question answered, please don't hesitate to access ALS Untangled or Dr. Bedlack's direct email.
Hi, my name's Renee Searvogel, and my husband has ALS and has had it for 10 years. On June 6th, it will be 10 years. And one of the things that his neurologist has asked, what are you doing, we tend to drink red wine frequently. So on a good note, drink more red wine.
I can only imagine my boss at Duke when I tell him I'm going to do a study on cannabis and red wine. They already think I'm crazy at that place. So, no, I mean it's really interesting. It's exactly the kind of thing we're talking about, that we have to pay attention to these anecdotal reports. They can be a hypothesis. Now, I don't know why red wine would slow down ALS progression, but if there are other people out there that we can find 5 or 6 people who are using the same amount of wine, well, then we have something. We have something that's probably worth studying. Yeah. Interesting.
Well, that was a great final question. I can't imagine a better final question. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us. Please, as you exit, don't hesitate to visit the exhibitors that are just outside the back door.